Or is there something special that ought to be about this time? Besides, we couldn't get very rowdy like some of those Corinthians did, very rowdy, very, very boisterous with this little bit of Welch's grape juice. And certainly we could eat a whole tray of this bread, and it wouldn't amount to a small or medium-sized Pizza Hut pizza. So much for the gluttony, so much for the abuse. It doesn't happen in our day, I don't think, does it? All right, now, so what is he trying to say? So does what he writes then to the first century Corinthian church mean anything for us at Celebration this morning in the 21st century? Or is it just a bit of history that reminds us that divisions and unseemingly ill behavior go a long way back? We don't have the usual focus or time for the sermon this morning. I'm going to change things around a little bit. Because the sacrament itself is the primary message for us this morning. This is the third time that I've shared communion with you in the last 3 or 4 months. I suspect it'll be the last time, as I will be not with you January, February, and March. We'll see what happens next spring. So this morning we're going to focus on what it means for us now. But let me suggest to you that we remember that this is no common loaf that we break, and it's no common cup from which we drink. And we need to be really cognizant of that fact. Over the years, Celebration, the church has gone to great lengths, the church in general, not this one specific. Oh, maybe this one a little. The church has gone to great lengths to visualize and to put forth the special nature of the chalice or the cup that is used in communion. For centuries, there have been countless stories of searches for the Holy Grail, referring to the cup of blessing that Jesus actually used at the meal in the upper room. In fact, those stories become the very basis of a storyline for a lot of things. For instance, there's that story about that famous archaeologist who goes looking for the chalice, the Holy Grail, the cup of Christ himself. What was his name? Jones, as a matter of fact. You remember the Harrison Ford movie? I know, but sometimes it gets a little confusing, and we try to separate apart. Where else is there such a breaking down of barriers at the table of fellowship that we have here? At most special affairs, the guests are carefully chosen and carefully invited prior to the event. None of us would consider crashing an event at the governor's mansion in Lansing. And none of us would perhaps consider crashing some kind of social event at the White House in Washington at that point. But at the table of the Lord, where we come together this morning, such barriers are broken down, and no one is kept away because of color or ability or age or status in life. At least in our Reformed traditions, and that's been true of every church of which I have had the opportunity to be a part of or serve over the last 50-some years. When you stop and think about it, this is a very, as our message title says, a very uncommon cup from which we drink, and a very uncommon loaf broken in our presence. Now my story. In the year 2008, 15 years or so, 20 years ago, not quite 20, while serving the Abbey Reformed Church of Clymer, New York, a rural little congregation on the southwestern corner of New York, just outside of Erie. While serving that congregation, it was because of a long-standing fraternal mission relationship between several of the New York Reformed churches and the National Hungarian Reformed Church. I had the opportunity and was invited, along with several other RCA pastors, to travel to Hungary and to the Ukraine for 2 weeks to observe and report back firsthand on the cooperative mission element that was going on between those two denominations. And I'm sure that Eastern Hungary and Ukraine are far different today than they were on that occasion. It was a fascinating experience as I think back and remember it. A fascinating experience that not only allowed me to see another part of the church's work going on in action, but it opened my eyes to seeing the power and the love of God's Spirit in a totally new and fascinating way. A way that, quite frankly, has ever since changed my thinking of and looking at and my outlook about what it means for us to come to the table. Several of us who made that trip to Eastern Hungary did the usual tourist kinds of things, but on that first Sunday, actually the only Sunday we were there in the 2-week period, we split up and we attended different churches. Actually, I went to 2 different services on that day and partook of communion in two different settings. The first service was in the large historic Hungarian Reformed Church in Debrecen, in Eastern Hungary, and it was pretty traditional. The senior pastor in dark pulpit robe at that point led the service from the pulpit. The several elders led the service in that respect, and they were present in the passing of the elements to a nearly full congregation of several hundred people gathered in this historic church, the largest Reformed church in the nation of Hungary at that point. Early in the service, and Hungary at that time, the Hungarian Reformed Church is about a third of the population of the entire country. It is the national church of Hungary. I don't know if that's quite the same anymore with what's gone on in our lives in the last few years with Hungary and Ukraine and the Soviet problem, but at that point it was true. Earlier that day in the great historic church in Debrecen, there was this gracious recognition made to the congregation of the several visiting pastors from the Reformed Church in America that were there in the service that morning. It was all very nice, and quite frankly, it was kind of humbling actually. But it was later in the day that something happened that I shall share with you now. It was later in the afternoon in a smaller congregation of Roma people in a nearby Ukrainian village that something special took place. Are you familiar with the term Roma people? Gypsies, we call them. You remember that during the Second World War, and we would be hard-pressed to forget, upwards of 6 million Jews lost their lives during the extermination process that went on in Germany. 1.5 million Roma, despised, rejected, half thought, not really given much credit. 1.5 million Roma people were terminated in the very same way. But it was in a small church, not much different in size than this one. Shape was a little different. It was square. There were rougher benches at that point rather than soft padded chairs. But about, what are we? I would say we're 45, 50 people, maybe a few more. It was in that that little building that afternoon, filled with people, filled with adults and filled with children, all sitting around, that something special suddenly took place. It was pretty obvious to all the congregation in that there were several visitors in church that morning. We looked different. We certainly sounded different.